This is Figure It Out Once and For All. This is Real Estate is a Scam. Success has no color, but money sure does. What's up, everybody? I'm Dan Fradenburgh, a moderately successful middle-aged white dude from the internet who's on the fast track to being canceled. And this is Figure It Out. I'm here also for Real Estate is a Scam. But on Figure It Out, I've spoken to all sorts of dream job holders for this show. And I always ask, how can somebody get there if you have no friends, no family, or cash, which it isn't always possible. But I'm joined today with some sharp people, and I've deliberately chosen an ethnically diverse panel. And nobody's getting paid for this, but I haven't told Ethan that yet. So we're going to introduce him first, but it'll be with a twist. So since I'm the only middle-aged colonialist white guy on this panel and named the show, I'm going to get each of you to say something about me after you're done talking about yourself. And please don't forget that fewer than 1% of people on Earth have red hair and green eyes. I'm a visible minority, even if I'm Scottish with a Dutch ancestry. So expect me to play the race card if you guys get out of lane. So Ethan went to Cornell at 16, went on to Columbia Law, and then with big Wall Street law in mergers and acquisitions. His largest deal he worked on, if I'm not mistaken, was $42 billion and involved Warren Buffett. And his record for highest invoiced and paid hourly rate was $1,200 an hour. And he and I have been working on a course for attorneys looking to get into commercial real estate. But Ethan, please let people know what you do in commercial real estate, and then say something to introduce me. And you can say I'm a total jerk if you want, because people were always busting each other's balls where I'm from. And it's big on my wife's side of the family too. So Ethan, what do you do in commercial real estate?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Dan. So I'm a corporate attorney here in Houston, Texas. I've got 5 kids with my wife that I met the first day of class when I was 16 at Cornell. The 2 things that I focus on in commercial real estate are I'm a loan guarantor, or it's sometimes called a key principal. So on deals where the lender requires a certain net worth or a certain liquidity be shown for the lead sponsors in order to qualify for the loan, I'm that other guy that gets brought in as the marginal guy that gets the deal done. And I love being that other guy. I don't need to be top billing. I don't need to be lead left, lead right. I'll just be some other guy. That's fine. Totally fine with me. And then kind of as part of that business, I started realizing, people remember that I have, keep a large amount of my net worth liquid. Sometimes gap loan situations come about. So I call these the gal gap loans. So if somebody's raised, 8 million out of 10 million of the equity, and they're going to borrow, I don't know, 30 million or 20 million from the bank, but they can't make it to closing because they've only raised 8 and not the full 10. They don't want to lose their earnest money. They don't want to have to return 8 million to their investors. They don't want to have egg on their face. They want to make their acquisition fee. So that's when they come to me, and I'll lend them the $2 million so that they can close their deal. The pricing for that is extremely high, but it's supposed to be the least worst alternative. And then one thing about Dan is when I did my first podcast interview with Dan, at the very end, he started speaking to me in Chinese, and I was like, wow, that's pretty good. And his Chinese is actually really, really good. And his accents are really great. I don't know if Americans know of Russell Peters, but he's a really famous Canadian comic. He would probably not make it here per se, too much. The ethnic jokes are a little too much, but he's amazing on accents. And I think Dan is just as good.
Wow, thanks a lot, Ethan. So let's go on to John then, because my next series of questions starts off with Yasmeen. So John, I didn't warm you up at all. Like, I even mentioned actually immediately before we hit record that I don't even have a great idea of what your age is, and I'm only guessing because I've seen your baby. but so like we know very little of each other, but we made a lot of we covered a lot of ground very quickly. But you want to introduce yourself in the context of commercial real estate there, John?
Sure. Thanks, Dan. So howdy, guys. I'm John Delia, a native New Yorker, now based in the Midwest. Been here for about a decade. I'm a second-generation real estate landlord, developer, home builder. I've been running my investment company here in Ohio and now in Michigan for quite some time. I invest across asset class, resi, multifamily, specialize in 100-year-old buildings for quite some time. Now working on some subdivisions, ground up construction, and my largest building is bigger than a football field. So adaptive reuse down in Detroit. Age-wise, I like to consider myself young, but I guess sometimes I'm old. I'm 32. So, you know, when I say a decade in the business, I bought my first building at 20, did my first self-directed IRA deal at 22, and I haven't stopped since. So, you know, cheers to the next decade. And one thing I want to say about the colonizer, Dan, is the niche that he's picked with compliance of 506B. Oh my gosh. I'm like, man, that was genius and much needed. So, you know, I think he's providing a lot of value there for syndicators, investors, and people not to be labeled bad actors. So well done, Dan.
Thanks, John. That was epic. So, Yasmeen, you're next up. So, in the context of commercial real estate and what you're up to, like maybe some of your consultation, what's your story?
All right. Well, I'm young. John, you are young, but I'm really young. I'm in my 20s.
Right on.
So I've been an entrepreneur for 2 years, but in the multifamily real estate space, I've only been in it for about 6 months. I joined Multifamily Mindset back in June. I learned all the basics from the underwriting to the basics of capital raising, so on and so forth. But I'm really excited to grow in this space, really excited. And I actually met Dan through a networking meeting, just like it's just been one after another. Since then we clicked because we really we have so much to talk about all the time. So yeah. And then outside of multifamily, I teach people about money. That one I've been doing for 2 years. I actually have some experience under my belt with it. Even though my background was in engineering, it has nothing to do with entrepreneurship. Originally, I made the choice to be an entrepreneur when I left college, and I never looked back. Yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's fantastic. And you actually hit on the next thing I was going to mention, that statistically speaking, the four of us, the outlier pattern is that we actually understand finance. That is not what I would consider normal. So I would like, before we get into the specific questions, I'd like to hear the shortest pitch to the camera on the importance of learning finance, learning the numbers, learning how finance works. Who wants to go first?
I guess I will. I mean, my biggest thing is if you don't know finance, you'll be broke for the rest of your life because your life revolves around money. Why wouldn't you understand how it works?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Who else wants to take a stab at that? John, Ethan?
Sure. So I'll take a stab at it. I think that once you learn how money works, potentially you'll move from consumer to producer. And I think that you'll realize that the only thing greater than compounding interest is compounding knowledge. So the knowledge on how money works, how to make money work for you, compounds just as much as compounding interest. And that can potentially provide you an infinite return. So I think it's crucial to understand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Ethan, what do you got?
The two of them said it better than me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right. Well, to lead on, I remember like you even say that, like, don't even encourage an attitude with attorneys where you say, okay, let the bean counters do the bean counter job and let the attorneys deal with the law. You're not even a proponent of that camp, right? You think that regardless, you know, you have to know your numbers, like that they're that.
Oh yeah. No, you got it right. So a lot of times accountants are afraid of their own shadow. Like they will say, this is not working, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, no, dude, it's fine. Like there's really no problem at all. And then a lot of other times attorneys say, I don't do any numbers. And you're like, okay. And they just flat out say, I went to law school, so I don't have to do numbers. And then that's when I joke and say, well, you need to hire a Chinese lawyer then. If you don't have to do numbers.
Right. Exactly. So there you go. So that is the importance of finance. Me personally, I think that to some extent, like when maybe it's a lack of severity or magnitude in school, I think it's implied that if you pick a job and then you save money, then you'll be able to leave the door open for retirement. And so you can get away without learning finance. So for my short pitch, it's just I found that even if you are successful and you have a good job, that's still not that's no guarantee at all. and that's a problem. But let's talk about something that all of us have experienced, which is having what Shakespeare described as uncluttered minds. The only downside to being young is that people treat you like you're young. So on that topic, to start it off, let's first ask the question. I guess I'll start off with Ethan. Do you think you should cut your hair and get a real job, or what?
What do you mean, me?
I mean, people in general. It's like, do you encourage people to cut their hair and get a real job, or do you think you should, find, better ways to make a living, find a career, that sort of thing?
Yeah, either or works. What I found is about 90% of people are generally sheep-like, which is totally fine. Nothing against sheep. Following the crowd and just doing what you're supposed to do is totally like a legitimate way of living and actually a really good fit for other people. And then there's a certain percentage of people that can never be an employee because their personality is terrible, or that they can't work with somebody. And then about only a percentage of those will actually make it once they go on their own. So just knowing what your personality is and what your style is and how much safety you need is really important. I've seen tons of entrepreneurs fail. And then it's really funny, right? There's also this confirmation survivalship bias. You really only hear about the people that actually succeed when they do something different. You don't hear about all the ones that live under a bridge because they did something different.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. So, John, what do you think? Cut your hair and get a real job?
So my answer is it depends. So I was kind of both. My dad was an immigrant from Haiti, Haiti, third world country, Western Hemisphere, most impoverished. So I'm first generation. Then he was an ex-Marine. For the most part, I had to learn how to be a robot in the beginning. I was very elite, high performing, put on the suit, cut my hair, don't have rainbow flags on your car because people might insinuate something. But I think that it really does depend on your personality. I think for me, when I was a young age and in MBA-like high performance spaces and I was productive and they're like, dude, we have all day. You're going to be here for 8 hours. What are you doing? It's like, what do you mean? I thought you just finished what you're supposed to do and then you give us more and then we do more and then we do more. So I think for me, the journey into entrepreneurship was just a matter of, maximizing efficiency, productivity, and really the contribution. But I also don't believe that you should be an entrepreneur or want to play business and not actually produce or quantify that return.
I absolutely love that. That is fantastic. And Yasmeen and I, we've actually had a few different recordings already with each other talking about a lot of the different subjects that you're mentioning. And it really is something, because one of the biggest ones is, we all have some degree of success, some of us more than others, but really at the end of the day, it's like, what is it that we all have in common, other than understanding finance? But so Yasmeen, nobody will tell you to cut your hair and get a real job, but they might tell you to get a real job. So what's your take? Do you think people should cut their hair? And basically that means like assimilate and blend in, right?
Yeah. Honestly, to pitch off of what Ethan said, it's so true that only like a small portion of the stories are told. Only the really mega successful, with a lot of positive drama in them, those stories are the ones that are told. So I think Ethan really has a point. I've always said that you're not superior if you're an entrepreneur, versus an employee. But I do implore people, like, even if you are an employee, even if you have a job, and I pray that you love your job, okay, please still learn how money works, because your wage is like the amount that you're going to get a raise. It doesn't outpace inflation, right? Like, understand where to put your money to make it work for you, because the system was still, in my opinion, not made to, help the average person thrive. So I say, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, learn your finance. And then if you do want to be an entrepreneur, especially if you're my age, leave the immediate gratification bullshit at the door. Leave it at the door, because, especially my generation, I think like just the younger generations, we're so used to getting everything at the press of a button that I've had a lot of people that I have attempted to mentor that came into my business and I mentored them. Some stayed, some left, but the ones that left, they left after like a month of no results. Like
Mhm.
that's not how entrepreneurship works. You know what I mean? If you're willing to be an entrepreneur, you have to be willing at the beginning to give your time for free. You come home from your day job and you don't rest. You work on yourself and you work on your business. So think about those things. Are you willing to do that if you want to be an entrepreneur? Because
Mhm.
it's really not, oh, a year from now I'm going to quit my job and be super mega rich. Like, please let that go. I mean, I would hope that for you. That'd be great, but yeah.
Right, exactly. And I'm going to be adding Dylan Clark, who showed up here. So hopefully he can turn on his camera in a second. And we just got to one of the main lines here, which is I wanted to name this call, Success Has No Color, but Money Sure Does. And one of the things, Dylan, he's focused his career since being a teenager on money and finance specifically, very similar to what Yasmeen has been up to. And one of the things I want to emphasize here is this isn't a gender thing. So don't worry, everyone will get plenty of opportunity to offend the audience at some point. But I don't think we're going to disagree that often on this call. And it's not because we're freaks, but really the first thing that I want to talk about, really the first main topic I want to tackle is how do you circumvent age as a problem, especially in commercial real estate. And now, of course, Dylan is approaching things from the straight financial aspect, as in like, he's not married to real estate. Okay, so I think that's important to realize in this, and that'll be in here, right? But when we're talking about age, we have to consider the other factors that might get conflated with them. So we're going to talk about taking your lumps and experience, and that can sometimes be sort of like hazing, but please, Yasmeen, if you want to tell me a little bit about growing up in Boston, coming from a Latin American and Lebanese culture and combination there, tell us a little bit about some of the differences in what those three different factors look like as far as trying to make some headway in today's economy.
Ooh. Just to get a better sense of the question, do you want me to relate it to my experience as an entrepreneur?
Really what I'm thinking is I know with expectations, like on one side, there's a gender thing that it won't necessarily just be immigrants or people with, like Middle Eastern heritage or something like that. Like, for example, my mother-in-law never learned how to read.
Yeah.
So like I get the fact that study isn't encouraged in all places, and really, I'm just talking about if we don't want young people to be discounted, if we want to have a quick way to establish that you've taken your lumps and you're ready to be respected like someone who, like basically like is what you see right here, because not a whole lot of doors slam in my face based on my appearance. Okay, like that's not a big, even though I'm a visible minority, as I mentioned, right? But and stuff. But Yasmeen, does that fence that in like enough as far as like where are some cultural things that really come up when you're talking about being young and trying to get some traction?
Yeah, it does. Okay, so I think I'm gonna tackle this first from what my cultures taught me initially. So I grew up in Boston, and I grew up in a really poor neighborhood. I grew up in my own home, which is a blessing, but half of the neighborhood was just government housing, and it was the projects, and I just saw a lot growing up, like too much BS, right? And I grew up with a Lebanese father and a Brazilian mom, and the Brazilian side's chill. It's pretty great.
So but how many is a Brazilian again?
Brazilian.
No, sorry, it's an old joke. Anyway.
I can't.
I am a dad. I'm kind of required to say dumb shit like that, but sorry. Anyway, please continue.
It's okay.
I'm sorry, I don't actually understand the joke. Is this something you'll explain to me later? I don't get it.
Like a bajillion, but like
you get
it?
Yeah, it's not that good.
I'll explain.
No, it's not.
We'll tell them. So we'll do that dynamic. But yeah, so the Brazilian side was pretty fine. But on the Arab side, and with my father being the Arab, I was never encouraged to learn about money. So from a young age, I was conditioned to listen to my father, be the perfect daughter, you know, and bless his soul, he's a great dad. It is what he was conditioned with. You know, go to school and then get a job, and then most importantly, get a rich husband that he approves of, you know, the religion, all the ethnic criteria, everything he needs to approve of. I really am just such an outlier because I did not follow the directions. But I originally majored in, you know, engineering, thought I wanted to be a doctor, went into big pharma, and then realized that everybody was overworked and nobody could afford to retire. So I started learning about money. It turned into me having a business and getting licensed and teaching other people about money and investment. So, but in that whole process, when I show up to the table now as an entrepreneur and overcoming my own conditioning, like the world told me, hey, because you're a woman, you're not the image of wealth. You shouldn't know how money works, and no one's going to take you seriously. And I've had people tell me that too. Like, I've had people tell me, when I wanted to start a business, no one's going to take you seriously. Like, what would you know? You're not a millionaire, because I had just gotten out of college. And I'm like, but I have to start somewhere. So when I came to the table, the conversation was, being a woman, either a client of mine would try to mansplain me how money works, and I'd be like, this defeats the purpose. This is not a competition. I just would like to have a conversation and provide a service. Or the way I talk as well, being ethnic and multicultural, is I use my hands when I talk, and it might not be, you know, I'm very expressive. I'm very warm. I don't try to come off as the smartest person in the room. So I think a lot of people, you know, expect that I should be stiff and like an absolute know-it-all. And no, that's not the case. And then, you know, me being young was another thing. So that was just my background and how it impacted me. And I think when you look at somebody who's young, what you should really see is, like, you know, young means so many different things. I am 24. At my age, my dad had already witnessed 2 wars, immigrated to 2 different countries, and like almost ended up fighting in a civil war, and like had to overcome all of that, and had gotten into university somehow, and was all by himself in America and like making a living for himself. So you'll never know. Like, some 24-year-olds have a nice, normal life, and that's not a bad thing. But you wouldn't know what somebody goes through just because of their age, or what they've already overcome in terms of those lumps.
I love that. And I want to get to Dylan in a second, but I want to go to John first, because like that was basically right down the same alley as the first conversation we really dug deep into, which is the question of background. You know, you already mentioned, you know, Marine background, but like ethnic diversity in your neighborhood. There weren't a whole lot of people who looked like you, right?
You know, so that's totally correct. So one, Yasmeen, thanks for that story. I love it. Love your upbringing, your background. Mine was on the contrast to that, which for most people it's surprising. So I grew up on Long Island in New York. I'd like to say we were the token black family in a multi-million-dollar neighborhood. You know, I joke with, not even joke, my friends and I talk about it now. In the last 25 years, there hasn't been another black family to buy a house in this neighborhood. It's like, what's going on, guys? Can nobody, whatever. But the point is, I think that, you know, I grew up with a lot of imposter syndrome. Although I grew up in a house, although I grew up in a big house, it was normal. There was nothing out of the ordinary. I didn't know what the other side looked like. I didn't really know what poverty really looked like. I just thought that everyone had what we had, and that was normal. Now, I think when I say imposter syndrome, there were people who had the allure of wealth in terms of the cars and the extravagance, where we were a little more conservative. I'm number 5 of 7 kids. So, you know, for an immigrant family, we needed a big house. There's a lot of kids, you know. But for the most part, you know, I think that my father's philosophy on life was very much traditional and not non-traditional, in the sense that fall in line, be accepted, you know, perform and do well. But it was never, hey, you're going to go to college and you're going to study this. I didn't even know what he did for a living until I woke up one day, and this was like at 18. And although I was on construction sites and although I was at his office, I was unconscious. And I kind of like to tell people, fra la 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 la, like, oh yeah, this is great, you know? And then one day I woke up and I was just like, whoa, like, what did you do? How did you make money? I don't want to struggle. I need to learn this. I need to learn the business. So, you know, I think for the most part, though, there's this sense that white was always right in my upbringing, because once again, I wrote a book years ago, and the first chapter is, I thought my millionaire dad was a bum. The guy was home every day on the couch, and he would cook dinner, and he would be there, and we would go out and we would hang out. And everyone else's parents had jobs, and they had to do the commute, and, you know, they had all these, you know, nannies and people taking care of them, and he was present. And I was like, don't you have a job? Like, what do you do? Why are you here? And we never had those levels of communication in our culture. The adults don't really explain things to children. We're not really told what's going on or how to live or how to, it's, you're disciplined, you do what we say, and get away from the adults. So, you know, I think that when I finally decided that I wanted to kind of be conscious and be present, I had to fall in line in terms of learning the regimen of what success looked like, how to get to where he was, and how to kind of earn my keep, etc. So, you know, it's always been a challenge, but I think being young in this business for me, especially in commercial real estate, I joke with my friends in New York, young in real estate is 55, 60, and you're probably a third generation, and your dad probably co-signed on the loan and give you money. My dad didn't give me a loan, and he wouldn't co-sign. So even my business model forced me to kind of be creative and learn some things on my own. But, you know, for the most part, I'm very grateful for it, because although I had the backing of the education and even someone to ask the questions to, I never wanted to stay in the business, whereas I call it being on the nipple, because I always knew if something were to ever happen to him and I didn't learn how to make money, I'd be screwed. So here I let him do everything for me, invest my money for me, and let me stay on the nipple. And what was I going to do later on? So I think I took that as initiative to say, look, I'm going to become self-sufficient. I'm going to learn the game. I will be a robot to a certain extent. And I just want to share one more thing, because I think it's hilarious now looking back. He used to say two things to me when I was shifting. One, you don't know what fun is. I used to think fun was going to the mall, consuming $300, $400 on retail, on clothes, on consumption. And two, he used to say this all the time, and this is going to sound really rigid, but it's okay. This is life. This is, like Yasmeen mentioned, the context of his world and what he grew up in. At the end of the day, all that matters is how much money you have in the bank. And that, like, has been playing in my mind for like over a decade. And it's forced me to say, you need something to show for your work. You need something to show for your effort. So rather than me hoard cash in a bank or hoard it in equities or easy liquidity, I like to buy buildings and land and things that I can point to, I can touch, I can see. And that brick and mortar is a validation of my energy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I love that, especially because like I think you were implying like a bunch of different habits and the importance of exposure to people who are successful, and that is really going along that line of that little tagline of success has no color but money does. Like is that like that is how you intended it as well, is to include that factor, is like, you know, like it's habits, like I mentioned in our other conversation, self-advocacy. In other words, sticking up for yourself, not letting people roll over you. That is one thing that I find the upper class teaches, but you don't get that in the lower classes. And it's not a color thing. It's an economic, you know, class thing.
So Dan, I think you're correct there. I think that the principles my dad was trying to teach me were around confidence, leadership. From a young age, it doesn't matter how old the people are, you have to lead them. You have to step up. You have to be confident. You have to stand tall. You have to do certain things. And to the point of money has no color, or, you know, I forgot the tagline, but for the most part, I've operated in majority white spaces my whole life. In Ohio, we're a majority Republican state outside of the cities. Where I buy buildings, majority of the guys I buy buildings from, they're white hair, old white men who think I'm a great Republican young boy. And I think for the most part, though, when people talk about racism, when people talk about, and I know it exists, don't get me wrong, discrimination, racism, all those things do exist. However, in the spaces in which I operate, I almost think that the energy like strikes through, and it's like, hey, there is no racism. You hear me, we talk, we're going to do business. What's up? And too often I joke and say, I don't inherit, but I purchase a lot of people's inheritances. Whereas, hey, your dad thinks you're not doing too well. You can't handle and maintain this asset because you want to play video games and hang out. I'm going to sell the building to John here. And that's just that. So I don't harp on race, but I do harp on leadership, on certain principles that will guide you to success.
Perfect. And so, Dylan, if somebody doesn't know about optimal taxation actions or decisions, then their chances of being financially independent and having enough money through retirement, I think, is really, really low, because your biggest bill is taxes, especially if you have a W-2, 9 to 5. So what's your take on that, Dylan?
Yeah, so on the taxes front itself, W-2 alone are very hard to mitigate on a tax front. There are ways to do it. It's just a bit tricky. I wouldn't, if I'm getting started, if I were to do everything over again, I wouldn't primarily focus on taxes and taxes, which I didn't. So I guess I wouldn't change anything about what I did. But I wouldn't focus so much on the taxes. You have to understand personal budgeting and having some sort of financial literacy in your life, or I could save you millions of dollars a year in taxes. But if you have no financial literacy background behind you, what's the point of me doing that? So financial literacy first, taxes then come. A lot of things on the tax side too is people just invest because of tax purposes. There's so many deals that I have seen that are absolute shit, but people invest and fund their deals because they get 100% bonus depreciation this year. It shouldn't be the reason you invest in the deal. The deal should still be good. If it coincidentally has a positive tax benefit attached to it, that's great. But tax as a whole, I think people, they either hate it or they love it. There's no kind of in between of it. It's, I saved a little bit, cool. No, you either want to save it all, or you're just someone who doesn't care and doesn't understand the power of 20-30% year-over-year compounding.
That's awesome. And so I'm glad that you were able to give such a detailed answer. But Ethan, when I brought this subject up with you about age in general, you had a wonderful answer. And I'm guessing that probably this time it'll be half as good as when you were talking off your head last time. But the question was what you did in regards to your age, seeing as though you graduated roughly 4 years before your Columbia Law peers. So you're walking in as a 22-year-old with all these 27-year-old grads. And how did you work age so that it wasn't a problem for you?
Yeah, so when I first started, I was always very sensitive to it. So I went to college when I was 16, and I graduated in 3 years. So I graduated when I was 19. And then I went to law school. I was either the youngest or the second youngest. I didn't really know the other guy, but he looked kind of young, but I never talked to him. So when I started at my law firm, I actually didn't tell anybody. One of my friends worked there from college, so he knew, and I told him, and he liked to talk, so I told him not to announce that to people. So very few people knew about it until several years in, because I didn't want people to think that I was either immature or I didn't know anything, or to even think that I was super duper smart, because then the quality of work would have to be better. So I wanted to be able to not have such high expectations placed on myself. So I just showed up and I just listened, and I just tried to soak up as much information as possible from other people. And then kind of to John's point, my wife and I have definitely faced overt discrimination in jobs as well as subtle. And I've definitely faced that in business as well, but it's I think it's less than it used to be. And I think in general, because America is such a money-focused culture, in general, if you can just make somebody money or save somebody money, they're motivated to work with you, regardless of how they feel about you ethnically, religiously, or whatever. So that's like a positive, I think, in American culture, because the money focus is so large that then the discrimination becomes relatively lower. I'll give you an example, which is, if you look at China, South Korea, and Japan, which are three of the most ethnically not diverse countries in the world, I would be extremely, extremely surprised if somebody like Barack Obama ever made it to the top of those countries. I don't care how smart he is. I don't care how much money he he wouldn't have made it in those countries, whereas he made it to the president of the United States here.
I love that. I love that. And I'm glad you brought that up. You know, I lived in Taiwan for 15 years, and that's part of the inspiration I have for this conversation right here, is because when as a teacher, I would be interacting with people of all sorts of different economic strata. And then as I pursued better positions, I'd be working with people who were doing better. And so I was able to see, like, there was no ability for the parents to hide what their actual motivations were for their children. They were saying, it's like, okay, they need to, you know, be really good at this. They need to be really this, and this. And I had to be the person to help them do that. And the thing that was really particularly amazing, especially, you know, me being married to a Taiwanese girl, I was able to see that if I'm looking at one person who's not successful and I'm looking at another person who is successful, one thing I know 100% for sure is it has nothing to do with race in those particular cases, because everybody's exactly the same race. So that's what kind of gives me the confidence to do this. And I've been the only white guy in a whole lot of rooms a whole lot of times, and that's why one of my favorite jokes to people is to say, it's like, oh, all white people look the same to me. So Ethan, I do have another to make things a little bit lighter here. You mentioned that you know, you 16 at Cornell, and culturally speaking, you know, with 19 years old at Columbia Law. How old were you before your parents let you off the hook for not becoming a doctor?
That's funny. That was never really in the cards for me. I never enjoyed medical stuff or science, so I was always like a math guy. So I really loved math, but you know, most math guys love science too. And I couldn't like mix chemicals together. I couldn't tell you what species this was, and I couldn't tell you why this thing moved this fast. Like I wasn't particularly strong at any of the sciences, nor was I interested in any of them. So that was never like in the cards for me. But my parents, when I got so the first job I ever had out of law school, I made $205,000 in New York City. And that was an amazingly high amount of money. And that was more than what my parents made combined, and plus my in-laws as well. And then it's a very similar situation for my wife. Her first job out of college in 2004, she worked as an investment banking analyst at a major firm. She made like $125K first year out of college as a 21-year-old. And so she also made more than her parents combined.
Mm-hmm. So that's a pretty great anecdotal evidence for cutting your hair and getting a real job. Dylan, I actually wanted to go over to you again and talk about if you're starting over, like, where do you want to do it? Because like right now, Ethan's situation is that he did well and he's doing well as an attorney, and then he's using what he was able to make effectively to make sure that he keeps his capital. So how about this? As a young person, what do you think? Like, where's the direction you should be going in? Like, should you be doing like what I'm doing, which is networking with different syndicators and then partnering up in return for deployed capital? Or do you think you're better off, you know, like pursuing cash at a W-2, or, you know, like what do you think is a good idea for a young person trying to get going?
I'd say there's a balance of both. It's seemingly impossible. I know it's not impossible, but man, does it feel like it every single day. Being a young person, finding individuals who will actually take you seriously, and the fact that you know what you know and you can actually pull off the things that you say you can pull off. You know, I started at 14. I'm 20, so that's 6 years of experience going in. Let's compare that to a college graduate. Not only 6 years of experience, 6 years of real world experience doing it hands on. So compare that to a college graduate who spent 2 years, 3 years, barely learning anything about investment management, compliance, business, and legal, compared to someone like me. You know, I'm more comparative to a 26 through 28-year-old than a 20-year-old when we look at it from those regards. Now, do I wish that I had kept a W-2? Sometimes. Does it suck not having, the safe net to kind of fall back on, and then you're constantly getting phone calls and texts from your parents, saying, what the fuck are you doing? Do you have your shit together? Are you going to get your shit together? Despite you actually having it together and being way ahead of where they ever were at that age, it's, there's a lot of external pressure, at least on myself, to kind of get things ramped up quickly in an exponential matter comparative to where they are today. So I'd say there's a healthy blend of the both. The only thing I would change currently is having the back end net going, just in the event that everything were to go to shit and nothing were to work out moving forward. That's the only thing that I change, but I'm all in on what I do. There isn't a fail option. That doesn't really exist for me. So if it fails, I don't know what I'm going to do, but that's a problem for that Dylan later on down the road.
Sure. And no matter what, you can underwrite. And I think that is a really, really resilient skill to have. But one of the biggest things, and it's kind of what, what hit me when you were saying earlier, there's one comment that, there's a lot of, testosterone bravado in this culture of trading and all this kind of stuff. So I kind of chalk it up to that kind of thing. But personally, I want to talk about being broke and what it means to be broke. And the reason why I wanted to mention what you had before is that I don't think we have to, relish the fact that some people will fail, we'll have to step over a few bodies, things like that. I don't like that part of any of this. I think that there must be a way where it's not like that at all. But I just want to qualify, because I think the main argument, especially of my body of work, is that we can do better. And the reason why people don't do better is because they just don't know. And I think what it really is like knowing what being broke is. Now, Yasmeen, we've discussed that before, like as far as what does actual poverty look like. I don't know if you want to tee that off, or who wants to talk about, like why you're confident what it's like to be broke.
I mean, I can.
Go for it.
Yeah. Okay. So I know that Dylan probably didn't hear this part, but growing up in a ghetto surrounded by projects, like just a few things that I witnessed. I remember vividly in college having 2 jobs and then being on scholarship, but one of my jobs had a payroll issue and they couldn't pay me for like a month. So I remember going to this place where I had to get donated canned food because I couldn't afford to go grocery shopping and get what I wanted. So I've been at that point. I remember when I was a kid that one of my best childhood friends was sent off to foster care because her mom was a junkie and just she couldn't be taken care of. I remember taking the bus to high school every day, and I remember like I was used to walking past this park at the neighborhood that I grew up in, and there would usually be like somebody drugged out, sleeping somewhere. But there was this particular day where someone was like in this particular spot where everybody walks like to go past it, and they were just like there on the ground, and I had walked over them thinking, okay, just another person who's like passed out drunk, right? Came home from school to find out that they had overdosed and died on the spot, and I had just walked over a dead body. And so for me, poverty is something that I had to grow out of, like mentally, and poverty starts in the mind, and I can just really feel it when I because in Boston, there's so many different neighborhoods that just have staggering differences in income and then everything else. And when you go into a place, like even there's this thing called Price Right over here. It's like an affordable grocery store. So if you want to buy bulk goods for a decent price, you go there. And sometimes I go there because like, why not? So I'll go there, but then you just feel that difference. That poverty is that mindset. It's like people aren't just broke. they're just not in a mentally healthy space. They're not taking care of themselves. Like the vibe is just different. Everybody's angry. Everybody's sad. Like everybody has a really, you know, down face. Even the way that they walk is like they walk like this. And I've gotten told by people, you walk like a princess. And I'm like, but aren't you supposed to walk with your shoulders back and your head up, happy about life, you know, which is what you're taught in the world of success, is healthy mindset, healthy mantras, right? That's frowned upon in poor communities. They romanticize the mental illnesses that go on in them. And so poverty is a state of being. It's not just money. It's like your clothes look like shit. And for some reason, we live in a culture where everybody wants to be that broke person who's a rapper with ripped jeans and gold chains. And it makes no sense because there's nothing cute about it. Poverty is not cute. People turn poverty into fashion. It's not really fashionable ever. Like, you know what I mean? But that's the society we live in, is a society that romanticizes this entire state of being, which is suffering and poverty, but it goes hand in hand. So I've literally lived it. I've had to outgrow it. I've had to change my state of being and essentially how I perceive myself and my self-image and how I walk and everything. And it was hard. It was hard because it's an addiction. You're addicted to who you are. So that's why, like, yeah, like there are ways that you can get help. And some people will logically know better, but their paradigm isn't there. So even though they logically know better, they'll still do what they're not supposed to do, and they'll go back to the old habits that kept them in poverty. Yeah.
That's really awesome. Except for the part where you were telling Ethan that he can't be a rapper when he grows up.
Sorry, Ethan.
Yeah, that one was never in the cards either. Hey guys, real quick, I gotta drop. This was super enjoyable. Everybody, thank you so much. And then just so the crowd knows, Dylan is probably the most impressive young person that I've met in my entire life. He's more impressive than I was at that age. I was just like following the crowd. So,
Ethan, you graduated Columbia Law at 21, 22.
But I just did what other people were doing. There's a big difference. You're not doing that, and you're extremely smart. So that's all I'm trying to say. You can send me $5 later. Thanks.
You should feel pretty good about yourself, especially like, I don't know. Anytime Ethan says something good about you, you're doing something right. So that's really great.
Right.
I guess the next point on, just so we're keeping things humming, is young people getting hosed. And specifically, I'm talking about like apprenticeships versus degrees, you know, that sort of thing. So John, do you want to take that one off? It's like what do you think young people should be doing?
Sure.
Yeah, hopefully in a commercial real estate context as well, but you know, not necessarily.
Sure. So one, I think that we have, in the era of social media and even before it, we have an era of normalizing all the success, not showing any of the struggle, keeping that hidden. That's like the hidden part of the script. Don't tell anyone. Surface level, I'm amazing. Look at the facade. It's beautiful. You want my life. You know you want my life. But really, you don't even know what the life is like. So I don't want to over glamorize privilege or, you know, not fully living in poverty, because there's challenges that come with it. Now, in the context of young people getting hosed, apprenticeships, degree programs, etc., one, you got to do what's right for you. But I was from the generation where you were an apprentice and you worked for free. So I did a lot of working for free. I did a lot of unglamorous work. I didn't start in the office. I remember my first commercial real estate gig was an 80-unit apartment complex where I had to earn my right to go into the office. And what that meant was anything on the ground, you go and pick it up with the little pooper scooper trash thing. And you got to walk it 3 times a day to make sure the grounds are great. So, you know, I think young people have to add value. I think that young people have to be curious. They have to, as Yasmeen mentioned earlier, delay gratification and stick with something more than a month and feel like, oh my God, if I don't get it right now, or if it doesn't pan out in a month, I'm going to quit. And I think that's really the challenge in the culture now. I think that there's a lot of unrealistic expectations. Personally, I opted out recently of Instagram, of TikTok, and I'm tripling down on LinkedIn and Twitter, because they're more intellectual and I don't have to use the glamour of look at my life and because I find that the allure of wealth, once you're on the other side, you recognize the world doesn't work like that. And the reason these people are marketing in the way they are is because rather than real estate, for an example, that's a generational sport in which you generate the wealth that people want or they expect. $100, $200 a month. Real estate's a scam. You're not getting rich doing that. It's slow money. It's the slowest money ever. So I remember, you know, I didn't start off going directly to college. I started off in community college. Like I said, when I was graduating, my dad didn't say, you're going to go to school, you're going to take the ACTs and the SATs. He said, you're buying a house. And, you know, luckily I left New York and houses were foreclosed 2008, 2009, and they were free. So I was like, wow, I can afford this. But I think that for the most part, regardless of the path, you have to leverage whatever path you take to actually do something substantive. And then you have to remove the anxiety of wanting it all now and kind of ground yourself in a higher purpose of what the future looks like. And that's really difficult. So what I mean is when most people get the college degree, they get a job, they get the new car, they get the new apartment. I was covered in paint and dust, you know, for 10 years. I joke and I call myself a construction cowboy because it wasn't until I own all these buildings and I have all this stuff that now I look at the photos and I'm like, yeah, so what? I own it all. And what do you guys have? So, you know, I remember recently I was at my barber shop and we had an apartment complex across the street. And I play the maintenance man. Nobody knows I own anything. I'm just a black guy. I'm the maintenance man. And our tenants are white, which is crazy. So they all think that I work for the boss. And they treat me like it too, but they don't know. And I remember this banker was sitting there and I didn't know it, but this woman comes across the street to the guy who owns the shop. He's like, oh my God, do you know who owns these apartments? I'm supposed to meet somebody. And the guy turns to me, points and says, it's him. And I was just like, oh my God. And I kind of felt shame because I think that I've had imposter syndrome on being okay with having wealth and having, you know, success. And sorry.
Yeah, exactly. All the calls,
You
and all
know,
the people,
it's like
they want your time. It's like, I'm on a podcast,
you
yo.
know, come on,
Cut it
guys,
out,
be
you
not
know,
disturbed.
right?
But once again, I think it's people have always looked down on a person who takes the trades, who takes the apprentice, who takes hands-on and getting dirty. So even for me, my journey through university, my journey through wanting validity from, you know, the Ethans of the world. Most of my peers were a little less than Ethan because Ethan is like incredible, and a little less than Dylan because Dylan, you're also incredible. But going to the elite institutions, going the traditional path, I think that a lot of times we want to conform and fit into that box. And what we're doing is we're hindering our greatness and we're restricting ourselves. When Ethan said he followed the crowd, you know, I was trying to follow the crowd, be accepted by the crowd. And the moment you can reject the crowd and have confidence in who you are and what you are, I think you can fulfill your purpose and your duty. And I think for whoever is going to take a path, traditional or not, you just have to kind of figure out what's your purpose, what's your intention, and can you be comfortable and confident in who you are and the journey you're taking? As Dylan said, he's happy in what he's doing. And, you know, all he cares about is himself. For me, I fought years and years of not being confident, not being comfortable. Now I've managed to transition out of that, but you know, it was a battle, real battle.
That's awesome. And it, like, going back to what Yasmeen said about posture, they've actually proven that, you know, you'll feel better if you have better posture. Okay. It's not just, you know, like faking. It's not like you're making a choice for the people around you. It legitimately makes you personally feel better to do it. And so one of the things I was concerned about as far as the perceptions of the audience is that we are all, you know, drinking the type of Kool-Aid that makes you believe rah, 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 be positive, be productive, be happy. And I don't think that that's really who we are as people. We've just found that it's like, hey, anything except that, you're going to have a real bad time come retirement age, I think is closer to what has gone through our heads. And I think that, you know, we've got a bright future ahead of us, all of us. But Dylan, one of the things that I remember jumped out about the two of us getting to know each other is the dark sense of humor thing. What's your perception on just people who, or maybe you can argue to the audience of how they know that we're not just, you know, Kool-Aid drinkers, that, you know, rah, 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 everything's going to be okay.
I think it's not even think, I know it's a mindset thing. If I'm sitting here constantly thinking to myself, so background, the city I live in it's like a 25% poverty rate and like a 25% unemployment rate. So, I mean, it is the ghetto. It is the project of this area of the state. It's, you know, second in crime to Chicago. It's Chicago, but here. Take all the bad parts of Chicago, mash it into one city. That's pretty much where I live. Now, fortunately, I don't live near that because I prefer to not get shot taking out the trash. But you know, it does exist and all that's around here. And you know, growing up here, I have tons of friends and whatnot that have been around that and have been exposed to that on long periods of time. And if you're constantly sitting there thinking to yourself, you know, oh, I deserve more, you know, the world's beat me down, you know, I should be making $100,000 a year, but you go and work at McDonald's for 8 hours a day, then you come home, smoke a blunt, and play Call of Duty. That's not going to get you anywhere. It like what you do in your own free time is fine. You know, not judging you for playing Call of Duty or smoking a blunt, but you know, just think about how many people come home every single day and will cook dinner, clean, and then they'll sit down and they'll watch Netflix for 2 or 3 hours. I don't know the last time I've been able to watch a TV show or TV series start to finish without getting anxious. Or if I do have it on, it's playing in the background and I'm reading the newest release of the CFA Institute books on portfolio management, or reading an IRS notice about you know, updated tax code laws on privatized 401ks. So you know, it's there's only 24 hours in a day, which is a whole other debate. There's actually not literally more, but there's more than 24 hours in a day, especially with technology that we have nowadays. It's a mindset thing. You know, imagine what you could do if you just stopped watching Netflix for 2 or 3 hours each night and read a book. As much as I hate reading books, just read a book. Your life is going to change in a tremendous way just by simply taking the 2 or 3 hours and shifting focus and direction and motivation towards it.
Yeah, I love that advice. And one of the big things that I think helped me climb my way up to CTO of the firm that I did, you know, back 2014 on to 2020. One of the big things I did is I changed my habits so I'd be able to think like a computer, or at least, you know, the programmers who were really good at it, right? And the way that I do that is, instead of playing Call of Duty, like let's just say that Call of Duty was my number one choice, I'd say, hey, what is there that is like maybe a number two choice, but it has a hidden benefit, like it's going to cultivate a particular skill that I value. So instead of playing Call of Duty, I'd do like a tower defense game, for example. And the nice thing about that is it teaches you to stick with your decisions and think quickly. Okay, instead of being stuck with instead of just going like you know, like getting analysis paralysis, it's just deal with the consequences. You made that decision, just keep on going, try and win with that, otherwise just restart, that sort of thing. So that's one thing that I personally did, was I switched to exclusively like puzzle games and things like that. But yeah, once I got more into marketing, then yeah, that just disappeared from my life personally. But as far as people in the audience goes, like I mentioned also, like I don't like the idea of you know, like walking literally over people who don't succeed's corpses here, right? But the thing I want to mention is the other part of the puzzle that I think is beyond experience. And I don't think it's something that people, like, it might not occur to them. And Ethan, he's gone, but he'll be fine with me mentioning this. He doesn't deal well with what is now non-judgmentally, I should add. I mean, in the business, in psychology, this isn't a judgmental label anymore. They describe it as neuroses. Okay, so that would be, oh, I'm too, like, you know, I know I need to email Ethan, but I'm afraid, so I'm not going to, so I don't. Okay, that'd be a sign of neuroses. And Ethan doesn't need to be treated like a scary monster, but he does demand prompt communication and replies. And that's something that is completely separate from age, but I don't think most people get in a habit of it. So as far as that goes, has anybody heard anything like that as far as like, you know, the importance of communication, emphasis, or just inexperience? Who wants to take that away?
I know for me on my side of things, you know, I've spent hours with people explaining out their situations, how it's going to benefit them with what we do, you know, yada, yada, yada. And then they don't end up becoming clients, but then, you know, I'll follow up, you know, do routine follow-ups. And I know they see the email. There's ways to track to see if they open that email. Yeah. Reply no. Something. You don't get to sit there and read it after I spent 4, 5, 6 hours with you explaining every single one of your worries that you had about doing this, answering all your questions, talking at a higher level than your tax attorney that you brought onto the call, higher than your CPA who you brought onto the call, to then not even reply when I follow up with you. I'm solving the entire problem you have, and you still don't want to have that problem solved. Apparently, you just want to waste both of our time, and you can't even say no out of respect. I think that's my biggest issue whenever it comes to communication. I don't care if you say no. That doesn't bother me. I mean, it does, but it doesn't bother me. But,
yeah, it shouldn't, because your next one, you know, should be a different situation completely. So,
right. Oh, and tell me what out of the 6 hours of time I wasted on you did you not like?
Right.
That's a great one. Yasmeen, what do you got? It looks like you got a.
In case you couldn't tell, I was reacting so much because Dylan had it just really hit home what Dylan just said. Oh my God, it just drives me crazy. We live in a world where people really are not comfortable with confrontation, because essentially, Dylan, that's what that is. Saying no is confrontation, and people are scared to do that. And it makes no sense to me, because confrontation is an essential part of communication. If you cannot confront anybody, you're telling me you don't have a spine. Number one. Number two, that you can't look at me eye to eye and be honest, because confrontation is part of being honest. Is, you know, like, I even had this problem on a personal level with friends in college where we're like roommates. I'd be like, hey, listen, like, we're living together, we're roommates. If I do something that bothers you, because, you know, people are particular, please, you're not going to offend me by telling me, hey, I don't like it when you, like, you know, use the blender at 6 in the morning. It wakes me up. You know what I mean? I don't give a shit. Just tell me. If you tell me, I'll be careful. I'll tiptoe around you. I'll care about the fact that you told me. But that's the thing, is there's so little confrontation. And, you know, when you talk about, like, Dylan, what you do is with finance, like, same, you know, personal investments with families and individuals. Money can be an uncomfortable topic, but if you don't confront it and face it and have those conversations about money, you know, either ways, with communication, I think confrontation is a very healthy, normal part that people are scared of, that people have lost the ability to do. And I say, like, get that back, because I don't care what your race is, what your age is. You know, I don't know where you go to school. I don't care if you only have a high school degree and if you didn't go to an Ivy League. What I care about is how you carry yourself. And if you don't know how to have a proper conversation with me and healthy confrontation, and, you know, really that essential part of communication, then that's just going to tell me everything I need to know about you. Not your degree and not the suit that you're wearing. Just how do you carry yourself? So yeah, my huge pet peeve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And John has a baby. I have some kids that I need to get back to too. But I only mention that because I guess, John, you're probably feeling me, which is that, yeah, we 100% feel bad every time we drop the ball with any sort of communications due to being a parent. But I think it happens, right? It, like, some things fall through the cracks. Like, John, what's your take? You know, you got a few more years on your trunk.
Yeah.
Our young.
So I do agree both with Dylan and Yasmeen. I think, one, acknowledge confrontation, and two, don't ghost people. And to Dylan's point, I have investors fly out. We do the meetings. hey, John, we're going to invest this amount. We want to do this and we want to do that. And then it's time to do a deal and you start to ghost me. And I'm like, dude, you're an attorney. You're 40 something years old. What are you doing? Like, you can't just communicate and say, hey, John, things didn't work out. So to me also, it's frustrating. And I think it's cowardness, but I do think it's a part of the culture that is, you know, people need to learn how to stand tall and just acknowledge it, say no, let us move forward. Because I think regardless of sales, the principles of follow-up, communication, and closure are critical. Dan, to your point about the kids and babies. So I have a newborn, he's 7 months, and he hangs out with me on Zoom and meetings, and I'm unashamed about it. But what I recognize is I know I make a joke to Ethan. Ethan really loves, and he'll respond promptly and quickly. So if it's, I can't get to the chain in a couple of hours, fine. I kind of feel bad, but I'm not apologizing. But I will respond within a reasonable amount of time once I am free and once I can acknowledge it, whether it's 3 in the morning or whether it's, 6:20 at night. I don't necessarily feel bad, but I recognize, hey, there is some times where I have to be away from a device because when he wants my attention, I'm going to be present. I'm going to be there. He can tell when I'm looking at a screen versus when I'm looking in his eyes and I'm giving him that attention. But for the most part, I really do believe in communicate, say yes, say no, don't ignore people, respond to the email, respond to the voicemail, or just send me a text, hey, I can't talk. But I think that we need to work on that as a culture and a society because we know you're on your phone. You can swipe the text away, but I think that's when people get frustrated. I see you posting, but you haven't responded. So just acknowledge them so you can go about your life and nobody feels any animosity.
Yeah, or you can just say that, oh, I schedule my posts. It's not me. Or, oh, it's my VA. Nothing like fake boundaries. That always works. So that's really, really awesome. And I really do think that this should be pretty helpful to young people. I've made it clear enough that it does have to do with you more than anything else. But if I were to put a second place, your immediate circle is definitely the closest second. And you're always going to get heat because, like you're going to have some friends from when you were young who, they want to hang out and, you're much better off doing something for your business and setting yourself up so that, you won't be on the street when you're in your 60s or 70s or something, right? So, yeah, go ahead, Dylan.
If I may, before we do wrap up, I do want to ask the group here a question specifically to you, Dan, and you, John. Whenever you see someone like myself or Yasmeen coming into the space with a higher level of knowledge, getting started young, do you feel that there's broader sense in the community of people, say your age bracket, of jealousy and animosity towards the fact that we are getting started when they look back and wish that they would, and that's why they feel that they don't want to do business with people our age because they're jealous of the fact that we're where they wish they were?
Excellent. So I'll take you one and I'll raise you. Here's the answer for the different careers that I've done, and where it's because like in the different, it depends on the space. So I'll go backwards. And in commercial real estate, I think that there's enough inventory that you don't get perceived that way. But in tech, absolutely, categorically, 100% young person equals threat. Okay, there's no two ways about it because you'll work harder, you'll do it for cheaper, and the boss is too dumb to know the difference anyway. That would be the mentality there. Teaching, I'd also say it's pretty similar. So I think you're definitely right that you appear as a threat, but I think like commercial real estate is one of the few places where you wouldn't. See, I think that, and Yasmeen and I have talked about this a little bit more. 20 odd years ago, a friend of mine referred to the phenomena as everybody goes for the shiny apple. And so the thing is like being young and good looking and that kind of stuff like that, like it has its perks, right? And, really, I guess what's going on is everybody's got insecurities. And as a young person, you're at the butt end of all of them. I know I sure was when I was a hot shot, as a 20 odd year old. So you know, it's that doesn't change, and there's still always the, you know, the desire to do hazing. But that's really one of the reasons why I'm releasing this series of videos, is because I don't believe in hazing. I think if you know how to do the job and you have the perseverance to follow it through, then, you know, give the person a chance, and if they suck at it, then fire them, find somebody who can do it, and let them find what they're good at. So that's my take. Anybody else have anything, party words, anything like that?
You know, I'll just add something to that. Dylan and Yasmeen, I think I was in your shoes, and I got started in real estate really young. I got started in finance really young. And I think to your point, Dylan, people, you're a reflection of what's possible, and it makes people think, what was I doing during that time? When people hear how many units or how many buildings I have, and then they assume that I'm in my 40s, and I'm like, I don't look that old, but they assume it's because, you know, it's like the expectation is in the maturity curve, it's a later adoption, have fun, post-college, you still have a few years to fuck around, and then, you know, you get better and you get better. And I think when they see people with such focus and intention, as you mentioned, rather than Netflix, it's read a book or read a K1. That's what I was doing, but that's a really nerdy thing to do. And I think while other people are having fun saying, I have plenty of time, they don't have the same level of urgency. So I would say stay grounded in whatever's fueling you to have the urgency, to be diligent, to be disciplined, and don't get discouraged, because what's going to occur is you're going to keep succeeding and compounding, and eventually you're going to be the leader and mentor that people want. And that's what I say, become the leader, the mentor that you wish you had. And the same as a client to other people. So in the future, when you see a mentorship opportunity to help other young people and show them, hey, I went the same path, you can do it too. I think we just need more examples of possibility and less insecurity. Or, you know, I hang out with a lot of mid 40-year-old and 50-year-old men, and sometimes I'm like, I don't want to be like you when I'm older. So that's part of the reason I keep doing what I do. I'm like, that's why I work so hard. Thank you for being an example, positive or negative.
I love that. Yeah, there's a huge degree of, you know, like there's a lot of people that they're pulling the ripcord and saying like, oh, you know, I better do something fast. But Yasmeen, do you have something else to add?
What I think that's really cool, John, that you started young too. Dylan, you started way younger than me. I started entrepreneurship when I was 21. So yeah, but something that I think is sad is that we live in a world where lack of purpose is the norm for young people. And ever since I was a little kid, like I originally wanted to be a doctor because as a child, I dreamed that I would volunteer with Doctors Without Borders, because I had this, you know, roses and sunshine view that I could help a bunch of sick people who couldn't afford healthcare. And then, you know, the reality hit, like if I went to medical school, I could not afford to volunteer. So let me be an entrepreneur, let me have control of my time and money so I can do what's meaningful and contribute to different communities, overseas especially, because if you've seen poverty overseas, it puts American poverty to shame. So, you know what I mean? Like my husband is from Cape Verde, and we want to do different projects in his country. I want to do clean water projects. Like I've had these dreams since I was 10 years old. And I find it sad that, you know, I ask some of the people my age, like, what do you dream about? They're like, I don't know. You know, so I don't think it's like, oh, it's lame and nerdy to be like reading something that interests you and also generates wealth, right? Like a book. You know, I think that should have been the norm. You know, like you should, the person who's passionate and who's driven by purpose, that's exciting because, you know, like, yeah, I'm 24. I've been to the clubs. I'm Brazilian. I love dancing, but that shit gets old. Like, if you're telling me you're at a club every Saturday night, I look at you and I'm like, aren't you fucking bored? You know what I mean? Because I've done it. You know, once in a while, because I love dance. I am Brazilian, right? So I'll go and I'll salsa and I'll samba, this, that, the other. But that's like, you know, it's not something that's not the purpose of my life. That's like a temporary, momentary thing. And if you live your life, you know, fleeing from one temporary, momentary pleasure to another, that's kind of lame.
Yeah.
So
I think
like being successful is cool.
Yeah. Like everyone's posting their Spotify raps right now.
Yeah.
And bragging that they've listened to, you know, 60,000 minutes of music this year. And it's like,
what?
Imagine.
Wait till I post my Audible Scholar Master's level status. Gamified that one.
Yeah, it's like, what are you doing? That's not a flex. That's sad.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, here's the thing. I personally, I've always been like a more like balanced type of person. I don't demonize you if you do like going out, going to the club or dancing. I have my moments too. Like, I like to switch it up. One weekend, that's what I'm doing. The next weekend, I'm camping and I'm, away from humanity. And then the next weekend, I'm doing something productive. Like, it is what it is. But, yes, you should still do the things you enjoy, but you should have purpose because there's different levels of joy. It's like what you do now that makes you happy, sure. But what are you doing now that's not going to make you happy today, but it's going to make you happy, tomorrow or 5 years from now? Allow your happiness to compound. That's the importance of this. When you have a purpose, your happiness compounds. You're going to be happier at 30 than you were at 25. Your life doesn't have to end at 30. It could just be beginning.
That's funny. Yeah. Or like you could be having kids. Yeah, that's really funny. And like that, going back to what Dylan said a while ago, like the other thing about being a kid and comparing to somebody who's like in their 50s or something like that, the other thing that has to come to mind is like if it takes you 15 years to do what a 55-year-old is pretty much forced to pull off in 5, like you can pretty much coast and achieve, those equity multiples, a whole lot faster. And it looks like Dylan has some thoughts on it, but I want to wrap this up. So let's go to the contact information. The LinkedIn is probably the best way to reach all 4 of us, except Yasmeen doesn't have her full name on there. So Dylan, you can start off with your. So LinkedIn's the best way to reach you figure, or is there a website or something that's better?
Yeah, LinkedIn's fine. Email as well. That's Dylan at abundanceassetmanagement.com. And you know what? Just for the fun of it, I don't know how many people are going to watch this, but 562-549-1747. You can text or call me as well.
Yeah, it's a good call. It's usually the people who watch this stuff, they're syndicators and stuff like that. I've done a lot of research on who's actually watching. John, how about you?
Posting your phone number out there on the internet.
No, I love it, Dylan. That's bold. So I'll do the same. So John Delia Jr. on LinkedIn. I really love LinkedIn. I'm going to double down on that platform. And then if you want, John at Housing JV, like joint venture, John at housingjv.com. Or like Dylan said, text or call me. I love to talk. 614-589-6986.
All right. Yasmeen? Are you going to say, don't call me, I'll call you?
All right. Okay, so good luck. Wait, am I glitching or am I good?
It did for a second, but you're good and you're back.
Okay. Good luck, you guys, because my last name's hard. So it's Alewan. I'll spell it ELAYWAN. Looks like Eli Wan. Okay. Just find me on LinkedIn because my email's even worse. I would say just find me on LinkedIn. And for the number, I guess that's easy. 857-540-1590. So yeah.
All right. Beautiful. And so that has been our episode. Hopefully that helped some young people circumvent the main mines in the minefield for getting through the world as it is, getting that experience border taken care of quickly. So the least you can do if you really enjoyed this, maybe you notice that, like your eyes are hurting. And if they are, it's probably because under Yasmeen, there's a big ugly red button and like it's really ugly. So you should click on it, and I want you to, because YouTube will start paying for these videos instead of me, and that'd be dope. Anyway, all it really means is my videos might show up on your list of suggestions. You can ignore those. Thank you very much for watching, and everybody, thank you very much for joining. This has been really awesome.